Howdy, folks. It is your friend Fishing with Dom, and you are listening to the Fishing with Dom podcast. I am back at it to bring you a new installment, talking to you today about bass fishing the autumn months. Now, if you're a bass fisherman, you know that this time of year, absolutely, well, just about anything and everything you can throw will definitely catch fish. But this time of months, late September, October, November, and even into early December in most parts of the country, you're able to catch largemouth bass very shallow, rather easy, and pretty consistently when the conditions call for it. And today we're going to go over different lures and where to throw them and exactly what you could be using. Start things off from my personal experience. When the water temperatures are declining in the fall months and they start dropping from the low 70s into the upper 50s, that's when the largemouth bass are going to become very, very active. They're gorging on bait fish, whether it be spiny bait fish like bluegill and perch or other bait fish along the line of shad and shiners. They are preparing for the winter months. So they are putting the feed bag on, revving up their metabolism, fattening up so they can make it through a long, harsh winter, and they are on the prowl for absolutely anything. And I read a lot of different articles, and I have a lot of different opinions on how to catch bass this time of year, because it can be pretty easy at times. It can be easily one of the easiest times of the year to catch, a large quantity of quality fish compared to the springtime, compared to late winter, compared to the midsummer. Each and any way you decide to target bass, it's just an overall great time of year to catch them. And there's a lot of different lures to do it. First off, you're going to be able to find bass wherever bait fish are going to be. So on my home lake, we have these deep trenches that go up to a shelf that tapers up from 14 foot of water and then instantly down to 30. I'll throw my square bill crankbaits out there, something with a nice wide wobble, or even a flat-sided crankbait like a Rapala Dives 2.9, something that has a lot of flash, can really show off the sides. It can call in fish that are hanging out around that shelf looking for their next meal ticket to be punched. And I've caught, oh goodness gracious, in this fall of 2013, I caught 5 largemouth bass in 15 minutes fishing one ledge with one single square bill crankbait. Now, crankbaits in general, they look like bait fish. They can also be painted to look like crawfish. They're excellent lures to use this time of year because they call fish in and they work very, very effectively. Just because you got 2, sometimes 3 treble hooks hanging off of them, those fish, they're revved up. They're looking to really score big on their next meal, no matter what the size is. And they're going to hit it with everything they got. They're not just going to barely nip at it. They're really, really going to give everything in a dime for what you have to offer. But outside of square bill crankbaits and flat-sided crankbaits, lipless crankbaits work excellent as well. A key pattern I've noticed when it comes to fall fishing is power fishing. You don't need to bust out the ultralight finesse gear and really work them on a drop shot because these fish are so active, they're so energetic, and they're so, oh goodness gracious, I don't know how to describe it. They're just, oh man, what they want to do is eat. I'm gonna put it as simple as that. And with a lipless crankbait, with a spinner bait, which I'll talk about that in a few moments here, those bass are going to see what you have to offer, and they're going to go for it. You don't have to fish it too slow. You can fish it regular speed, jerking it back and forth or relatively quickly. They're going to go for it, absolutely, because they have one thing on their mind, and that is getting enough food to get bigger for the winter. Like I've said before with ledge fishing, lipless crankbait shines because you can fish it on the deeper side. You can fish it on the shallower side very well. You can vertical jig it in extremely deep water. I know a lot of anglers that vertical jig them on Lake Erie and on the shipping channel for Lake St. Clair. And even on my home lake, I've vertical jigged lipless crankbaits before in about the 50 foot of water range or so. Very, very promising lure to use any time of the year, especially during the fall, because you can just burn it back to the boat. They're going to crash it. And another benefit to fishing with a lipless style of crankbait, you can run it as shallow as you want if you keep your rod tip up. If you're a shore angler, and this is a time of year where shore anglers really can strike it big, uh, compared to any other months of the year. You cast that lipless crankbait out there, if you can hover at about 3 foot under the water surface, you're going to be able to catch fish all day in a lot of conditions. Just because those bass, whether they be largemouth or smallmouth, they're going to be cruising shallow up towards the docks, up towards the isolated cover, whether it be timber, uh, pontoon boats, docks, other boat hoists and boat ramps. They're up there looking for bait fish, shads, shiners, perch, bluegills, because those bait fish are going to be feeding on plankton that are growing around said cover. And as fall goes with weather, in Michigan especially, one day it'll be 75 and sunny, but the water temperature will be in the mid 70s, or the next day the air temperature could be mid 60s and you could have a 10-mile-an-hour wind. That's where a spinnerbait really comes into play. Get a lot of flash going off of it. You get the skirt kicking behind it. Calls in a lot of fish. Resembles a school of tiny bait fish and plankton, depending on how you want to look at it. Spinnerbaits work really well, especially when there's a chop to the water, when there's definitely some wind. I'm not much of a spinnerbait angler myself, but in the fall I'll definitely throw them. And you'll catch a lot of different species on a spinnerbait. It's not just going to be your bass. You'll also catch your fair share of pike doing that, especially when you burn them under the surface or if you're fishing them right above weeds. But if you're fishing shallow, fish them deep, a spinnerbait gives off a lot of vibration. It has a nice appeal to it. Another excellent lure to fish during the fall months when the water is starting to get a little bit cold. Oh, goodness gracious. So many different There are so many different ways to fish the fall. There's almost no wrong way to do it. There's no exactly right way to do it either. Whatever works best is going to work best for you. I look at a lot of forums. I read a lot of different articles that all the guys, especially professionals who do very, very well in the fall, they're just throwing jerk baits, which is another very, very promising lure to use in the fall. Crankbaits, spinnerbaits, various topwaters that I'll talk about in a second. But in my recent experience over the past 2 years, I've done very well on crawfish lures in the shallow waters. Now, I haven't really focused on throwing them in the mid depth to deeper depth range like I was throwing my crankbaits, because it's not as practical. Those bass out deep aren't going to be hugging the bottom looking for their next meal. They're suspended looking for the bait fish. But up shallow, I was fishing a 4-inch blue and black Berkley Powerbait Chigger Craw on a 3/16 Texas rig sinker and a 4/0 offset hook. And I was just throwing it up into the weeds, throwing it around docks, and I was catching some of my nicest bass of the season, probably 10 feet off of the dock I was standing on. Just where I was seeing fry, where I was seeing some bait fish swimming around, I was throwing this crawdad around. I was very, very impressed with how it was working out for me. Now, you can freely have this Texas rig going on there, or you can peg the weight with a slip float stopper when you're rigging it, or you can jam a toothpick in there if you're not too concerned about your line. It generally shouldn't be a problem either, but throw baits shallow, like soft baits, especially if you want to power fish them. Texas rigged worms, jigs especially work very, very well in the fall. Like I just said, the crawdads, you can flip and toss them around in certain areas, burn them back to the boat. It's a good time of year to sight fish also, but you got to pick and choose your days. You're going to have to go out and sight fish for them because the weather in the fall months can be very, very inconsistent. But outside of those ways to catch bass during the fall months, topwater action seems to heat up as well. Whether or not you're using a walking bait, a popper, or a buzz bait, I just started really throwing the buzzbait around just this past weekend in mid-October, and oh goodness, I was throwing a, a weightless finesse bait up into this area. It was pretty full of lily pads and weed cover, and then the depth tapered down to about 8 foot or so. And I was working it pretty well with this finesse presentation, but I wasn't getting any bites. So I decided to pick it up, power fish a little bit. I threw a buzzbait in there, and I had a blow up immediately on it. Now I missed the fish, so I immediately picked up my other spinning rod and threw that finesse bait back out there and couldn't get anything to hit. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe that was just one. So I pick up my bait caster and whip that buzzbait back out there again, and I retrieve it back, and I get a second blow up on my topwater presentation. And I don't know if it was just me, and I was a little hook set happy because I jumped the gun twice in 5 minutes, and more than likely I think it was the same fish. So buzzbaits work very well. Topwaters in general work very well in the colder months. You can up your size, you can make your hooks a little bit larger, and when they touch it, they're pinned. They're not going to go anywhere. Just make sure if you're topwater fishing that your hooks are sharp. Generally speaking, topwater baits get banged up the most because they're on the surface. Most of the time when I'm fishing them, I hit docks. I'll rub up against trees and bushes and rocks with them sometimes. Just in general, look over all of your baits, but especially topwater baits. I'm not much of a popper fisherman, but when cold fronts move through, or even with walking lures, I've started fishing with walking lures a bit. When a cold front is moving through, you don't have to continuously bring the bait back to the boat or the dock or wherever you're fishing like you would a buzzbait. The buzzbait's sole mission is to churn the surface of the water and continue it back to you. With a popper or a walking style bait, you can give it short, subtle pauses to give that fish an opportunity to come up and strike it. And sometimes that's exactly what it takes. The other day when I missed those fish on a buzzbait, if I didn't have a skirt on my buzzbait and I replaced it with just a single twister tail or some sort of minnow styled bodied soft bait on the hook of the buzzbait, that bass would have had a smaller area to hone in on, and I probably could have hooked him and landed him. It's just with the buzzbait, sometimes they're short striking it just a little bit when it's colder out, so you really got to make sure they have it before you set the hook. I'm still a little salty about missing those two recent fish. Oh goodness, but you learn more from the fish you don't catch. There's nothing more true about fishing and hunting for that matter than that. Swim baits are another excellent all-around fishing lure for the fall months. You can throw them deep, you can jig them, you can throw them shallow, you can burn them under the surface, you can pump them back, however the fish want to have it. Just use a simple color, go with a shad, a plain white, sometimes a blue or a green. That'll go for it. That'll definitely get the job done for catching bass at least. Sorry there, I had to gather my chain of thought. When those fish are cruising and looking for an opportunity to feed, and you give them something that looks like it's a bait fish, whether the size pardon me, whatever the size it might be, they're going to take that opportunity. And you can upgrade your size as well. But when you do that, you're not going to get the quantity of fish to catch throughout the day, but you'll get the quality. You'll get your bigger bites on the bigger swim baits because you can catch 1 and 2 pounders all day just a few foot underneath the surface. But if you're fishing a little bit deeper and you're fishing a larger swim bait, you're going to get your bigger fish of the day by forcing a reaction strike and having everything in your odds. Oh, there's so many different options to go with as far as fall fishing. Just anywhere between the 3 to 6 foot range for shallow flats or the mid depth range down to 14. I've done very, very well. They hold fish, especially bait fish. If you're looking at your sonar graph and you're seeing weeds or some sort of structure on the bottom, fish around it because there's definitely got to be something hanging out around there. And don't be afraid to cover water quickly when you go out there and fish in the fall months, just because those fish are going to be active any time of the day. It's not just going to be a morning bite. It's not going to be a night bite. I've caught five. If I had to put a weight on this bag, I would say my best, like, I wouldn't say my best five, but over a span of 15 minutes or 20 minutes where I caught five, I probably would have had probably a 15-pound bag. That's a 3-pounder on average in about a 20-minute window. That's pretty good for the middle of the day on a square bill. But I I change it up no matter where I am on the lake. If I'm out a little bit deeper, I'll throw a diving crankbait. Sometimes I'll pump the lipless. I'll see what they want. I'll see what the fish will tell me. But when I'm shallow, I'll be throwing the a Texas rigged worm, a jig with a crawdad or some sort of chunk on the hook, a jerk bait. Depending on the wind, I might be throwing a spinner bait. But when it warms up through the day, I'm definitely going to be throwing a topwater bait because I'm a big topwater fisherman. It's challenging and there's nothing like it. Oh goodness. Lipless crankbaits, jerk baits, swim baits, spinner baits, even frogs work very, very well this time of year too. But there, as I've said before, there are no wrong ways to fish for bass in the fall months. Plain and simple, there's no wrong way. But there will be days where certain baits are better. Use the wind to your advantage. Know what to do. If it's windy and you want to get away by throwing a topwater, try throwing a prop bait with a propeller on the front and the back. See if you can churn up the surface, call fish in with the flash and in action. Throw the jerk bait if there's a cold front moving through, or even a topwater if the cold front's moving through. You can go out when it gets really cold in late fall in vertical jig tubes. Well, you can cast tubes and work them slowly back and still catch fish. But you can go out there, vertical jig with blade baits, swimming jigs like the Jigging Rapala and the Northland Puppet Minnow. And you could also jig lipless crankbaits deep, and you could catch giant smallmouth on Lake Erie doing that all the way up until, shoot, mid-December. I'm not even kidding. Fall is my favorite time of the year to fish because you can go out there, throw anything, and catch bass on it pretty much. You just, on some days, you're going to have to find out exactly what they're going to be looking for. Focus on sunken islands, rocks, swimming areas. Once, if there is a swimming area on the lake and the buoy markers, if there are buoy markers, have been taken down, go throw a few baits up in there. You might surprise yourself. It's all sandy from the people swimming there all year, kicking the bottom around. So it's very, very hard. I've caught a lot of fish cruising up in swimming areas out of season too. Clear water. Shoot. As far as line choices, I've always gone with a fluorocarbon. I'm a big fluorocarbon guy. When I'm fishing around heavier cover, I'll use my braids. But when I'm topwater stop and go fishing, I've got a monofilament. The point I'm really trying to send out of the park with this podcast right now is just about anything in your tackle box and just about anything you have in your rod arsenal, as far as your reel, your liner, your rod, power, and action, can catch fish, no matter where you are this time of year. When that water is declining between 75 degrees down into the lower 50s, the possibilities are endless. I could go on for days about this topic. Just because I've done so well doing it, especially when I was a kid. I remember going out on my home lake after football practice, and whether I'd be shore fishing or out on the canoe or out on my boat, I'd be throwing baits out deep and catching fish all the way up until December 20th. I could be Texas rigging creature baits relatively shallow and catching nice 3-pound largemouth. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of great ways to do it. And just for the past 2 years, I really started fishing creature baits up shallow, like crawdads and lizards and hog style baits. And then just this past weekend, I was throwing topwaters and I was doing pretty well. But go out there, give it a shot. You might surprise yourself, just like I did. For a long time, I said spring is my favorite time to fish because they are absolutely hungry for it. And late winter is a very unique time of fish too. But fall, it's easy to fish in the fall because They want to eat. They're not afraid to eat. And they're going to go for whatever you're offering most of the time. But that is all I have for you today. I appreciate all my viewers and listeners to my channel out there on the internet. If you have any comments for podcast or video suggestions, please let me know below. Follow me on social media at Fishing with Dom. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And I'm going to leave it at that. You folks, be sure to have a great night. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.